What was it that initiated you into this space of being like, man, I really have to understand this more, or how can I help others with it?
The time I came in, it was getting better, right? There's emotional survival for law enforcement, Dr. Gil Martin, but just putting out information that will be useful on your journey. Right?
I've lost friends throughout my career, and especially when you're not there, it's like one of the hard things. Like, if I was there, would it be different? You know what I mean? If things were different, would it have changed? Would it have been me there? At least I would have rather have been me. That's something I used to go over in my head all the time. Like, if I was there, I would have much rather been me than them, because I think they're better people.
So the times when you thought you're going to pull the trigger and you start taking slack out and you start thinking about all these things, it's not necessarily the life flashing before your eyes, it's your career flashing before your eyes, and it's your name in the paper, and what's the media going to say?
Welcome to the Vinny Roc Podcast.
I took the blows and did it my way.
It's time. The Vinny Roc Podcast.
Welcome to the Vinny Roc Podcast. My next guest is Eric Tung, and we're going to talk about mental health, which I'm fucking super excited about. But before we get to that, I want to talk about my sponsors. You guys already know, Core Medical Group, male testosterone replacement therapy, but not only for men. If your wife feels like her hormones are out of whack for many different reasons, she can get her blood work done there. So you guys go check them out. They're supportive of veterans, first responders, everyone. I love them. Go check it out. Modern Gun School is a online certification for you to become an armorer. You can use your VA benefits to apply for that. It's not very expensive. If you guys have just maybe like a couple months left over on your VA benefits, boom, hit them up, get some certifications, learn how to build a gun and fix a gun in the comfort of your own home. Okay. Last but not least, Grim Blades. Let me get it on there. Boom. There you have it. I just got some in. Look at this. Really cool looking sharp blades. I don't know if it's going to pick up them. And there they go. You guys go check them out. Really sharp. I'm going to put this on my kit. This is going to be something I wear anytime in the field from now on. I like them. This is actually my favorite one right here. It looks sharp, beautiful, clean, sleek, can fit anywhere. When you're wearing any kind of tactical gear, that's what it's about. Stuff that fits nicely. Besides that, we'll talk about the rest at the end of the program. But Eric, man, so it's funny. You reached out to me via social media because AJ connected us. Is that who it was?
I believe so. But I actually, I work with a guy that you were in the military with.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that was
Dave,
that was the other connection. Dave Guderi.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he brought you up quite a while ago when I was starting out the podcast, and he's like, "Hey, I got a buddy that does this," and I think like many people, it's just like, "Hey, I just got to do my thing and figure out some kinks and get over this this new thing," because a lot of people try something like this, and it is pretty daunting at first to even go public and put your face out there.
Yeah, I've been doing this now since 2013 was probably my first public like posts with friends and whatnot, and you go through phases of understanding this space, the goods and the bads, right?
Mm-hmm.
Putting yourself out there, people will critique it. And as well as you start to kind of find your voice. I think it's now, 2025 now. And I feel like I've finally found the space and I'm really comfortable in it. And that's how long it's taken me when I started this years ago.
That's cool, man. I think I'm curious. Does it feel like you're finding your authentic self, or just comfort being who you want to be, putting out what you want to put out?
I think as you age and life happens, you start to settle into, the final you, if you will, right?
Yeah, I feel that.
And I think we're always growing. I've always had a heart for veterans, first responders. I've always had a heart to try and help and serve people, so I wasn't able to get it to this place now until I healed myself, if you will, right?
Yeah,
but
I love that, man.
I also realized how much this process is ongoing. And so from what I was before till now, I guess it's a really cool case study, but I was really in a space where I needed community. And then the community became a very drinking community. And as I'm trying to heal, I had to start pivoting, and I slowly changed, you know, and I tell people that this is probably similar in most men's mental health, but veterans who are trying to transition are like the scale from like monkey to man, you know, and when you first get out of the military, I think we're closest to monkeys because we're just like, tell me what to do and what to shoot and I go, you know, and then.
I mean, cops aren't that different at times, right? And there's a lot of crossover. You've done both, so.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So like in the transition of trying to really find that self-healing and becoming human again, you know, I think it's in that whole spectrum. And I feel like I'm closer to the end of that spectrum now more than ever because, you know, I have a lot more answers than I did in the past. But I've always wanted to be in this position. Now I'm a substance abuse counselor, and I'm finishing up school to become a clinical social worker and to actually provide clinical support for men. And I mean, I say men because I'm just familiar with how men work. Yeah. Women, I'm still trying to figure that out. So I don't feel like I'd give the best support to women.
Sure. Yeah, but to each their own, right? You speak from a place that you know you best, and that translates to so many guys, dudes, first responders, military, right? And so I think that ultimately what I hear in that is I feel very similarly, right? Like I'm coming up on 40. I'm actually really excited because I feel like more and more as you get older, right, you find out who you are. You've always been that person, but it's kind of peeling away all the riffraffs to know your best self, right? Show up your best way, serve people where they're at, where you're at, kind of in the middle. So I love that, man.
Yeah, I agree. So tell me your journey, man. You know, you're working with Dave Gaderi, a guy that we've been in basic training together all the way up until Ranger Battalion, you know, and so that's cool. Very interesting to hear what your story.
Yeah, man. So, I mean, we've been about in the game for a very similar time. I think we hired on just months apart, but going on 18 years now in police work. But for me, it was, I suppose a lot of this is kind of expanding on what we were just talking about, like kind of revealing who you are and finding yourself through this journey called life. But I was not the typical kind of wanted to be a cop my whole life. I would grow up pretty, you know, traditionally raised, like traditional Chinese American kid that, you know, the stereotypes were true for me in that like you had a couple, you know, charted career paths that were acceptable and really promoted. And those were very much like expectations, right? So it was like computer science, get a PhD, parents would settle for a master's. It was like all these kind of things built in as like a young grade school kid or like pre-med, something like that. So I stayed on course most of the time. I was a pretty good kid, but ultimately it was in college where I started as pre-med, and pretty quickly I was like, yeah, that's not my thing. But trying to figure out what that thing was. And I think that resonates with a lot of people when the call to service and not knowing exactly what that looked like. But ultimately, a lot of the frustrations I felt being a young man, seeing a lot of the things in the community I was in, a lot of violence, a lot of victimization, you know, kind of taking advantage of other people, these predators in our society. And I wanted to do something about it. I grew up as pretty much like the shy, kind of introverted kid, but I think with the sense of coming into age and going through school and becoming a man, I was like, well, why not me? Like, why can't I do this? And I have certain skills and attributes. I'm a pretty sharp guy. I'm a quick learner at things. So I just threw myself at it. Like I wanted to look at law enforcement. I wanted to look at firefighting, and I just started getting everything I could consume, which unfortunately back then wasn't things like podcasts or a lot of blogs. Like there just wasn't that availability of info. I didn't really know anybody that was doing that as a career. And ultimately that summer, I just started testing and throwing myself at the process. And, you know, you figure it out, you learn what to do, what not to do, and the scores get better and better and your rankings get better. And that summer I was hired on at my current PD in Washington State.
That's crazy. That's cool. So tell me about your upbringing, man. You said traditional Chinese upbringing. Yeah. I had a couple of friends I grew up with that were, you know, raised traditionally Chinese. And, you know, very kind of a strict upbringing. Education's always first. It was like, I'd go to his house, be like, hey, let's go out. And he's like, I still have homework. I'm like, on a weekend, bro? What the fuck? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so homework in the summertime. Like my mom would go to like the teacher supply school for teachers and like homeschool folks, right? So I'd have like the workbooks. It's like math, reading comprehension, all the things. So even before I moved, grew up initially in Memphis, of all places, where there's not a lot of Chinese American people, but they all find each other and, you know, immigrant populations. But going to, you know, Saturday school, and I think a lot of first generation Asian kids could reconcile this, or maybe different ethnicities, but having like a language school. So Monday through Fridays, public school, Saturdays, going to Chinese school, learning to read and write. I was a pretty quick Chinese school dropout, which is maybe a signal of hope that I didn't have to follow like the path. When we moved up to the Seattle area, I was like, I got to stop that. But yeah, piano lessons, the whole nine, man. So yeah.
You still know how to play?
No. So that's one of the more regrettable things. I wish I knew how to play. I wish I knew how to speak more adequately. You don't use it, you lose it, and that's a real thing. But with my grandparents all passed, I lost a lot of desire to continue on with it. Because that was like the main reason to continue speaking and being proficient. And then it's like very little opportunity to use it now, and so it's very poor, to say the least. Yeah,
no. Look, you preach to the choir in the sense I never learned Spanish the way I should have. My parents both speak it fluently. It could have been super beneficial in my career, but I don't know. I just never focused on it.
My Spanish is way better than my Mandarin, so that's the laughable thing. And man, for a little bit I was going to Taiwan to visit family, and in my brain, because I'd taken so many years of Spanish, high school and a little bit in college, like my brain would go English to Spanish to Mandarin to back to Spanish for whatever reason. Like that was like the path most traveled for language translation. Super goofy.
Yeah, I get confused because I did 9 months of of language school for Pashto. And so there's still times I'm like, I don't know if this is Spanish or Pashto I'm throwing right now, but I'm about to say it.
just own it and see what happens. Yeah.
So let's talk mental health real quick. I've been in this space for a while, working with a lot of people, struggle my own self. I have some, childhood trauma stuff, and I have some work trauma. What was it that initiated you into this space? Being like, man, I really have to understand this more, or how can I help others with it?
Yeah, it was a progression of things. I think like so many people, the time I came in, it was getting better, right? There's emotional survival for law enforcement, Dr. Gil Martin, but just putting out information that will be useful on your journey, right? And so hearing those things, being like, sure, no, I believe it. Okay, cool. And then you keep doing the job, and you get affected by things, you see things, you do things, you see traumatic things happen to those around you, the people you're trying to help, and then also your fellow cops. And it takes a toll. And so I took I took that more cynical turn pretty quickly on with all the things I was exposed to in environments, just like that culture shock in some ways. Luckily, I had enough support mechanisms around me, friends, family, to snap me out of it, kind of call me out, right? Whether it's calling out or calling up, I'll take either one, but it was extremely beneficial for my foundation. Move on a little bit more, like through most of my career, I was involved with peer support, which, is a growing awareness. I think hopefully all organizations recognize they need something, start somewhere, right? With peer support as a cultural tenet in your organization. But, I was involved with that. And I think a lot of that was just trying to be helpful and kind of being an approachable guy. I got along with a lot of people, try to be that type of person. But it really wasn't until seeing more and more significant things happen. And for me, it was believing in peer support, but the real, I think, genesis to me trying to take off doing more with my group, my organization, and then through Blue Grit, which is, my social media and stuff, was losing a buddy in work, right? So losing my buddy Diego in the line of duty, and seeing how that affected me and everybody, but then also recognizing from the example of other neighboring departments coming in to help with peer support and debriefs, and just really ironing out a lot of that, seeing what was a potential, right? Like where I could help maybe lead and build those types of programs and practices in my organization. And then that was the dive of just trying to put out more helpful information for first responders through social media, and now the podcast. 2020 was really the genesis of that, which came a little bit later, but just trying to be positive, right? Trying to be constructive, because we have enough of the negativity, and we got to be intentional about escaping that.
Yeah, man. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about Diego?
Yeah, for sure.
And what happened that day, if you don't mind, because that'll lead into a few other things. Sorry.
Yeah. He was, in some ways he was larger than life. And I think that's really appropriate for how foundational and how much he impacted so many of us. Like, it's not just me, but he was a one of my best buddies. Like we worked crew together. He'd be running with me when I'd be handling the dog, all those kinds of things, but also like time off. Like we were really close. He was at my bachelor party and at my wedding and all these things. And we would travel like a group of us that were really tight at work. In a lot of ways, he was also the guy that would challenge me, sometimes directly, sometimes more subversively, of like how I could be like a better guy, a better cop. I was so focused on, which is important, like the crime fighting aspects, especially being a canine handler. I was like, I just got to be in a position to find people, track people, and capture, arrest people. But he'd be like, hey man, like, why don't you bring the dog to this elementary school? I'm doing this thing. I'm like, no way, dude. Like, I'm not doing that. I got more important things to do. Like, sorry, it is what it is. But he would drag me to things like that. And it was really eye opening. And that's where I really encourage cops, like, if they feel that they can't do that, or they, they're above it, or they're just uncomfortable, that's probably a clue that they should probably do it, because it is for the community. When we do this whole job, it's for people, like the most vulnerable people. And it's hard to argue with kids being the most vulnerable people. So, just show up and just try. Like, you don't have to put it on, just try and stay curious and just give it an effort. So in a lot of ways, he was just a very positive influence for me and so many people around. The night he was killed, essentially, there was a call where, and I wasn't working, which, I had a little bit of survivor's guilt and some frustration there personally, which is such a common thing in our communities. But I wasn't working. I'd promoted. And so that was like my crew, that it would have been. But I, was a different assignment at that point as a sergeant. Essentially there was your bar fight, kind of argument in a parking lot, shots fired, and all the officers took off trying to find those guys, the occupants, the suspect vehicle. He went to lay out spike strips, and bad spot. He'd stayed in the road too long. These are what the indications look like. Was he either tried to retrieve or fix the spikes to avoid the wrong, like not the suspect car, and he was killed. And that was 2018. And so in so many ways, like finding out in the middle of the night and getting woken up, like it still feels surreal in some ways. But, and I know that there's a lot that I'm just kind of jumping around, but I think that everyone that knew him closely reflects so much that there's so much positive energy and positive vibe that came from him in life and in death. And so in a lot of ways, whether it's Diego's example or some of my close calls at work, I feel very fortunate and grateful that I've had the ability to be reflective and be really grateful for all these things, because, life just passes so many of us by. Some of our closest friends and colleagues, like we're just kind of spinning our wheels. And I think we all have a tendency to do that if we're not intentional. Like I catch myself in it too. But that's a lot of what Diego's example was for me. And, even doing this stuff, right? Like being on a podcast, which I'm so grateful for, and having my own show and putting myself out in the space. Like I am that shy kid, but it was Diego's example that, like, hey man, you can be more than just in your head, and you can be an example. You can be positive. You can be a role model for other people. That's certainly like a huge motivator and inspiration for me.
Yeah, it's never easy losing a friend. I know what you mean. I've lost friends throughout my career, and especially when you're not there, it's like one of the hard things. Like if I was there, would it be different? You know what I mean? If things were different, would it have changed? Would have been me there? At least I would have rather have been me. That's something I used to go over in my head all the time. Like if I was there, I would have much rather been me than them, because I think they're better people, or they're better rangers or better law enforcement officers, I lost a friend in the border patrol that was just like an unsuspected, like domestic fight. And while it was happening, I was actually ordering food within like 10 houses away from him. And I'm like, fuck, if I would have known sooner, you know what I mean? All the things, right?
Yeah.
And it's just crazy. Even losing brothers and sisters to suicide, it becomes like, why didn't they call me? You know what I mean? They know I do this, right? It's going to be something in your space that you work in the mental health space, right? You're an advocate, you're peer support, you do podcasts, you have, the whole thing. And when one of your circles find themselves in some kind of crisis and they don't call you, you're like, that's the next thing of like, what the fuck? Like I'm trying to show them. And that's been hard for me, is losing friends that I'm like, man, I'm trying to create a whole space for us. And it's a hard space to work in. I've done like the social media community groups where like one was called Vigilant Guard. And it's like when anyone's struggling, we try and interdict, right? And when you have a bid, they called it in the internet, they call it a battle in distress is what they call it on social media. And this is early on. I mean, this is like 10 years ago when it started, social media was using, and someone goes, someone makes a post and all of a sudden we all just kind of get involved. And it becomes tough because you can't save everybody, but our heart wants to give everyone something, you know what I mean? And so it puts you in a very vulnerable space. So I would tell you, and I'm only saying this to you because like, I know you're committed to this space, is that make sure that you also focus on you too, your own mental health, because taking on everyone's shit is part of who we are.
Yeah, I love that you brought that up because that's where my mind goes next, is like knowing my level of survivor's guilt, where I was like, for a bit, I should have promoted. If I didn't promote, I would have been working right there and maybe something would be different. There's hearing it from so many different guys, whether it was this call and losing Diego or so many other calls or so many other situations, right? Where people are like, man, I went home back, out of state for the weekend. Like it's on me. I'm like, no, like when you step outside of yourself, you realize how irrational it is. It is rooted in passion, emotion, and caring so deeply. And that is something that I get concerned about with those in the wellness space, as you've spoken to, right? Who takes care of the caretakers? And it is that emotional burden where if you step outside of yourself, right, you hear someone else say it, then of course, Eric to Vince is like, dude, you're doing so much. Like you can only do what you can do and you cannot control for everything. And sometimes I wonder if you thought about this, where I've wondered and I've told myself, man, you got to check your ego. If you think you can, it's not on you to save everybody. It's you to put out what you can in the best way. Like, hey, like throw some lifelines and some, life preservers out in the water, but you can't jump in the water for everybody. And you also I got my family, and you can't take care of others truly, not sustainably, unless you're taking care of yourself.
Dude. It's funny because you're probably one of the first guys that I've had this conversation with, because I have this with my wife. And, we lost a friend of mine, Neil, to suicide. And we're still no answers on why. He seemed like his life was going really well. I looked up to him, you know what I mean? And when that happened, it was probably the hardest blow I took, because like, I'm like, even when my friends are having a hard time, they don't reach out to me. And I think I've established a space where it should be welcoming enough, right? And so then I take that as like, I'm not doing enough. And so I become this fucking machine of like, do more. And so I've had to find a balance in that. And this is probably where I'm always going to struggle, is trying to find a balance in how much I give others and ignoring myself. I've had to really fix that a little bit. But you know what it feels like? Have you seen The Green Mile when the big dude sucks in, like
John
sucks
Coffey,
in people's pain? Yep. Mm-hmm. And then he later throws it all up, right? Mm-hmm. And he's in his room. I had an experience. So I do these men's wellness retreats, and I'd love to invite you to the next one. I think it'd be great for you to show up and check it out. But, I did this retreat, and I'm hearing everyone's pain, and they're all, hugging and telling me and all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, it's cool. And I'm kind of in a space where like, man, I'm taking on everything. And so when everyone left, I went and did my own ceremony. And this is non-psychedelic, just like a native ceremony of just, plant medicine that's non-psychedelic. I want to make sure I repeat that. And it made me purge, like so much so that like I was shocked. I was like, what am I throwing up so much for? And the healer, she's like, I think that your body, one, telling you, you've done enough, but two, releasing everything from this whole weekend that you've taken on. And I, whether that is or it isn't, right? It's what it felt like for me in ceremony. It felt like, okay, cool. It's cleansing of releasing all the extra bad energy that not bad, but everyone's pain that I've been holding on to.
Yeah.
And so I was able to leave that retreat feeling like I should do this more for myself, because I don't. I don't give myself the moment of debriefing everyone's stuff. And I just carry it with me, and I carry that guilt, and I carry that pain, and I feel bad for them. And I turn around and it's like, I got to learn more as the healer, I guess I would determine to call myself the kind of the healer to find ways of using my own practices on myself.
Yeah, that's the trick, right? That's the trick. And I love that you brought that out. I've used the same metaphor. I do love that movie, but I think that the lesson with John Coffey too is that he's not, every time he does it, every time he takes someone's pain or their sickness, it takes a dent out of him, right? He can't come back to his full self. I'm not saying that we can't, as those that are caring and supporting others, but you do have to feed back in, your wellness. What does that look like? Does that mean you go off the grid, you go into nature for 30 minutes, an hour? What does that look like? Like, we have to do those things. And I feel myself at a lot of different times. I'm sure it resonates with a lot of your listeners that are into this. Probably a lot of us are putting ourselves second, third, fourth, 10th, right? Whereas even something like this, how much I've tried to grow my podcast in just a couple of years, but like, people are like, how do you create so much content? How do you record this much with your full-time job? You have your kid. It seems like your kid still likes you, like all this stuff. And I'm like, I'm just trying to do it all right, but I have sacrificed my workouts, and that's my thing. Like, that's my zen, my rebalance, like get in the gym or get on the trail. But that's taken a back seat. And so I have to be intentional. I have to like literally write it down, put it in my schedule, trail, like something like that, to keep ourselves honest, to keep myself honest.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's something that, my fitness was struggling for many years because I felt like I was in a building phase. I resigned from the Border Patrol in 2015. I had a heart situation happen in 2016. Since 2016 till now, I've been like a fluctuating who knows what. And it was always because like, I'm not going to worry about that. I have so many other things. I'm building my finances, my career, my kids, and I kept putting everyone last. And, and then recently I found myself at a healthy weight of 309. But not only was I carried the weight well, I like to say.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
The problem with that was that my heart wasn't getting any better. My heart continued to have struggle. I've been shocked back to normal rhythm 4 times. Not a lot of people can say that in their life. And I've been converted back as well once with a chemical shot. I forget the medication's name. So I have been closer to like, oh my God, like you've allowed yourself to get to 309. You've helped hundreds. You've helped who knows, however many people. It doesn't fucking matter, right? But might not be making it around long enough for my own fucking kids as they get older. And that would cause more emotional and mental stress on them than anything, right? The person that's most near and dear to their heart besides mom is dad. And I'm making choices for everyone else around me, but I'm not thinking about me. Because if I think about me first, at least then it means it sustains this thing a little longer. And so I've gotten back into the fitness and back into like really well-balanced diet because I'm a sugar fanatic. Like I stopped drinking, right? I thought I made all the right choices. I've been sober for 5.5, almost 6 years now, right? Nice. It's actually closer to 6 years now in a couple of months. But I thought I made all the right choices. Like, look, stop drinking. That's a big one, right? We'll just do that. And then, I've gone back to school. I've gotten educated that in subjects that are, psychology, blah, blah, blah. And I thought I made all the right moves, but I still kept ignoring me. I still kept ignoring like just my health. And just recently, man, I had an incident with my heart that was so scary, dude. Where I sat there with my wife and I said, damn, I think this is it. And we're driving, she's driving me, and my heart is like, it's at a resting 190. And those of you who probably don't understand the heart very well, 190 is like a sprint. And so I'm sitting in a car, my heart's at 190. I can barely focus because it's so obvious that something's fucking wrong. And they call it SVT, is right. That's the heart rate. How's that? And it's so fast that you can't really determine what the fuck is wrong. You know what I mean? They don't know if whatever it is. So I get to the hospital, and like I said, I took to my wife and said, I think this is it. Like, to register that moment and tell my wife that, it was probably the bad choice, because she looked at me like,
yeah, well, I was gonna say, like, what did she think?
Yeah, she's trying to keep it together, bro.
Yeah. And
so we get to the hospital. Mind you, I've been shocked back 4 times already. So getting shocked isn't a fear of mine. It's just like, fucking get it over with. But the doctor gets there, the cardiologist there, several nurses. They put the pads on my chest. They do all the they put all the things, the bells and whistles. This thing is going through the roof. And the doctor keeps looking at it, looking at me, looking at it and looking at me. And she goes, I'm going to give you a medication, but it feels like your heart's going to stop. And I'm not in the right place of mind at this time to hear that because I'm already thinking I'm dead. I'm dying, you know? So she says that. I said, I'm good, doc. Go ahead and shock me. And my wife was like, what are you talking about? No, take the shot. I said, I'm not fucking doing it. And I'm getting emotional, bro, because I'm like, I already feel like I'm dying. And she just told me it's going to feel like my heart is going to stop. I don't want to feel that. I'm already scared. Like, I'm already uncomfortable. I'm scared. I'm thinking of my kids. I'm thinking about like my wife who's sitting right there in the fucking room. They're looking at thinking like, this guy's going to have a heart attack at any minute. There's no way he can sustain 190 fucking beats per minute fucking for this long. You know what I mean? So the whole thing is happening. And my wife just looks at me and she goes, take the shot. And I was like, okay. So I took the shot.
Yeah,
and
yes,
it regulated, bro. And that was it for me. I said, I'm fucking done fucking around. The whole drive home, they ended up, you know, they checked on me for a little bit, released me. And I said, I got to get my health back. Like I'm not going to, I don't want to feel like that. And that's because for this long, I've been giving everything to everyone else and forgetting that the most important person in my world, for me to help them, I got to help me first. Self-aid, buddy aid. You know what I mean? And I wasn't doing self-aid, dog. I'm sitting here fucking just patching up everything. And fucking now, you know, life has I've had to turn everything around.
Yeah. It's the whole put your own oxygen mask on first before helping others, right? And like in our allegory, like, you feel it. And I know a lot of people big in the wellness or pure support space where a lot of people have actually recognized, admitted publicly, that sounds bad, admitted, but they're saying, yeah, I was worried about everybody else. And meanwhile, my own health, my own relationships, fill in the blank, my own career was just downsliding, right? And so, yeah, you might be able to snap a couple masks on different people as the plane crashes, but how many until you pass out and then you can help nobody, including yourself, right? And so we can redline a little bit, and I think that that's something that a lot of first responders and military, we're used to that, right? We're used to overemphasizing, hyperfixating on this thing, but we have to recalibrate, kind of reorient and juggle these things back. And so I think that the work-life balance, the health balance, it's an illusion, and it can be really daunting to try to attack everything at once. But kind of like you put it, right now, fitness, health, nutrition, that has to take a higher priority space. Everything else can kind of just downshift a little bit. You don't have to set everything down on the ground, right? But I think for a lot of the people that are more type A or doers, they like to be busy, they like to be productive. It's just looking at it that way. So that's what I encourage people to do, because that's what helps me a little bit, because I'm usually the all or nothing guy like you, right? And it doesn't even have to be sweets, but I say, like, you know, we're just through the holiday season now, right? But if I go in the break room and I have one cookie, there's no having one cookie, it's having 4 or 5, and then kind of just walking around awkwardly and waiting for someone to leave the break room so I can go back and get 2 more. Like, I know what these patterns look like. I know this about me. Or taking a thing of macadamia nuts to the couch, like that thing is like half gone, if not all gone. And that's like, that's 1,000 calories, man. You know, so
yeah, man,
it wasn't even fun.
I mean, I don't want to disrespect the term an addict by any means, but I am an addict in certain things. You know what I mean? I get addicted to certain things, and that pattern is just like compulsive. And if my fitness isn't in that pattern, I'll fucking ignore it for years. And I have to be very cognizant about, like, here's my routine right now. Fitness is part of it. Eating, you know what I mean? Especially when I travel for work, it's like, fuck you, bro. Stay on target.
Yeah.
I believe it's part of avoidance. And that's part of that is a mechanism of whether it be post-traumatic stress, whether it be, it's like a self-defense mechanism. Like, I don't want to fix me. Yeah. I'm like, I don't want to focus on me because I'm so focused on everyone else, and focus on everyone else. It heals me, right? It fills my cup emotionally. And as I'm chasing that feeling, right, whether it be dopamine or whatever it is that feels good to serve others, I'm chasing that addiction instead of focusing on me, because focusing on me is so much harder, right? It's like, going into a fucking cold plunge is so hard to do, but I can tell everyone else to go do that shit and all the benefits of it. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that's part of my own, that avoidance of working on me is a big part of my own struggle. And I say struggle, it's like my own mental health, that I'm avoiding fixing me. And a lot of guys like us take that position. It's if you ever read the book by Dave Grossman on combat, it talks about how some people were willing to engage and some people just kept helping others with medical or loading and then not engaging, right?
Sure.
Some people don't want to face the hardest thing possible, which is self-preservation, fix yourself, that they turn and help others. And like, that system isn't sustainable. You know what I mean? It isn't sustainable. And I mean, talking firsthand, bro, it didn't help me. I have to find a way to balance that, man.
Yeah,
dude, I know I'm talking a lot.
So
I know. Yeah.
No, I love, this is what I nerd out on. So this is fantastic.
Me too. And I nerd out on it because I'm very good at, I guess, that deep dive within myself, thinking like, fuck, dude, you fucking it all up. But Eric, what are the things that you do? Let me ask you that. What is your system that you've provided for yourself that you've learned that works and that you can say, hey, you're like me. It's like, I know it worked for me. It might not be the answer for you, but this is what I do.
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
It's constantly evolving. And that's the thing. It's like trying to remember to put on the student hat, right? Like I want to be a consummate student of life, fitness, leadership, work, like wellness, like all these things. But a lot of my, I call them like non-negotiables are having intention through the day, right? And nothing's perfect, man. Like just like that backslide of like 8 cookies, whatever it is, like you start with know thyself, and kind of like your point, like a lot of us don't want to know ourselves because it's scary. It's not a comfortable place. All the things you talked about and we talked about earlier, like life experiences, childhood stuff, it's all part of this thing called you, right? So, but yeah, not to get too much in the weeds, like certain things that make me have like a fantastic day, fantastic week are being purposeful, intentional, right? Like not just going to work because it's the thing I have to do at this hour, but like, okay, what am I trying to do at work? What kind of energy I'm trying to bring? So a lot of that is mindset. I'm stealing this tip from, prior boss, which is on his drive home, no matter how his day went, we have to recognize that our kids see us and remember us based on how we come home, right? So just the biggest headache day, sky's falling, all that, not to make it about you, but make it about them because they're so eagerly waiting, right? So I feel fortunate that I'm a little bit of an older dad, I got a 5-year-old, I'm like pushing 40 now, but just to recognize, and most days I'm better at this, but I still have a lot of work to do, but just showing up for her, right? So the lesson from my old boss was like on his drive home, he thinks about what is going on in his different kids' days and weeks and like, how does he want to show up? So, a 5-year-old, it's not that hard. You just show up, just be happy and goofy. Like it's mostly a win. Non-negotiables, I'd say like, I got to get some movement in. And that's where I tell everyone and I encourage everyone, just do what you can. Start with 5-10 minutes while the coffee's brewing. If that's all you got based on how your day's structured, you will feel so much better by just doing that thing, right? Adding something healthy, adding some protein in your day, right? Some healthy protein in your day somewhere. It's hard to do this whole like diet makeup change up. Like I got to get this meal plan. I got to go shopping and meal prepping. Like just start somewhere, these tiny habits, steal that from the book, start somewhere, habit stacking. And then for me, more and more, I'm very proud to be like the old man early riser. Like I get up really early before the family, and that's where I'm able to do a lot of the things I do. Plan, journal, think on things, create, write, and that's like my time and working out, right? So then with that, sleep hygiene. So being better about not watching stimulating action stuff, suspense stuff. Because I've grappled with sleep insomnia for years, especially on graveyard. Like I was never a good daytime sleeper. So it's integrating all these things in a way that, it might sound like a lot to somebody, but that going through the extremely rigid like meal plan years that I've had, well, I've learned a lot from that. I don't quite do that now. It doesn't serve me and my goals right now, but there's a lot of lessons in there and from sleep when I was a lot more regimented that I tend to employ in kind of my trend now.
Yeah, it's good. It's got this well-rounded approach to just health, man. I manage a men's group. Me and my buddy, we created this men's group, and it's just really about men's mental health. Open discussions about tons of different things, and the list of things that we talk about can go from finances related. It doesn't matter. But the one we talked about last night is having core values that you stick to in a sense, right? So like when I created businesses, I decided that I want to stick with 3 core values, and it's going to be entertain, to entertain, inspire, and motivate. And if it followed those three, well, then it's aligned with how I am as a person, and I can move in that direction and be proud of that, right? Because
I like that.
So if anything comes down my lane, they're like, hey, would you want to sponsor this? Like, or we want to be a sponsor of your podcast, is what it looks like. You're like, nah, it doesn't align with those core values. But staying true to those core values has kept me grounded, where I just feel like I'm staying in a space of comfort mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, professionally. And those are some of the things that, in our group we talk about. And in that group, man, I hear all kinds of things where like, it's very easy for guys to get off track and try and focus on other people instead of themselves. And so I have to guide them back, like, hey, let's get back on your task, not mine, or their task.
Yeah.
And you start to hear, in the end of it all, in the group, what I've found the most in it is that like trying to help these guys find purpose, but also when you are very candid about your message, right? Candid about your story, your hardships, whatever that is, how relatable it is to everyone in that circle, because we're all humans. We're all going through life. We're all trying to figure it out. And we all want to be fucking happy, dude. We all want to be content in those shoes. And I'll invite guest speakers, and Eric, I'm going to invite you to be a guest speaker one of these days as well, so you just tell your stories in the group. And you would be amazed that one thing you say, all of a sudden I get text messages from these guys like, holy shit, that hit. I had a guest speaker, his name was Brandon Young. And, everyone has a story. His story is great, right? But the craziest part about his story, he said one line. He said, I was a runner as a kid, and because I was always running from life. I was running from my father. I was running from hardship. I was running. And he became a very good runner realistically in real life. He goes, and I'd realized that the whole base of his story was like, I needed to stop running. And bro, everyone was like, blew him away.
I just got chills.
And I was like, yeah, dude. And we were like, what? And man, we had people breaking down. We had people texting. And it's just interesting that I sat there thinking like, every time I invite someone, I'm like, I hope this has value for the group, right? I hope it just brings value. I hope people leave and think, man, I learned something. And you just never realize it, that we're all in the same fucking fight. Same. It's fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Have you noticed that with law enforcement officers? As you tell your story, they're like, yeah, me too. Same.
At times. Yeah. And I know what I like to remember and invite people when they consider sharing, or they're like, yeah, I'm down to come on the podcast. I don't know what I have to offer. I'm like, dude, you have so much to offer. Like there's something for everyone. There's everyone for someone else. Right. And so even, I thought what would really resonate with people was like my officer involved shooting, but it was a very uncommon circumstance. So it makes sense that it wouldn't, but my lessons learned from that translate to people. But one post and something I talked about in my podcast was just kind of this notion of like near incidents, right? So the times when you thought you're going to pull the trigger and you start taking slack out and you start thinking about all these things. It's not necessarily the life flashing before your eyes, but especially in recent years, it's your career flashing before your eyes, and it's your name in the paper. And what are the politicians going to say about you? What's the media going to say? How terrified is your family going to be if people are targeting you because of this controversial shoot? Legal, justified, all these things. And yet, right, we see brothers and sisters in this situation. What does that do to your psyche? What does that do to your post-traumatic stress response? And so many cops reached out saying, dude, I feel like you saw me. Like I've been there multiple times. And in my simple share was, I've had more angst from my near shooting than my actual shooting. Like I had more sleepless nights and wondering what if, feeling good that I didn't pull the trigger because guy was trying to goad us into suicide by cop. He had no gun, but he's acting like it. But I did feel guilty, right? So it's that kind of, it's an element of guilt or, kind of, I suppose like moral injury at times, because I'm like, man, I know what my training said. And in some ways my instinct said, do it, but my gut and my heart said, wait. And that wait became a guilty feeling because you're like, what if would that weight have caused, me or somebody to get shot, right? Or worse, right? So all these kind of, super complicated and competing feelings, and just to share that and see how someone else responds is rewarding, right? Because, we've done the deep dive on our own, but then just to connect with other people, right? And it goes back to that community that you're speaking of.
Yeah. It's crazy, man. I love the law enforcement space so much. You know, I've always believed in the fight against good and evil. I know there's always a weird gray area in that fight as well. And, you know, recent years, there's been so much controversy on law enforcement, but on top of that, like what's a good shot, what's a not a good shoot.
Yep.
And it's tough. Social media has made it that much harder because you know you're going to be persecuted by the mob of people who have no idea what this career entails and have never stepped foot in that scenario and are going to judge every bit of what you do. And that's now in the back of every law enforcement officer who does the job. All right, the public scrutiny that comes with it.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen good shoots that law enforcement officers have lost their jobs. I've seen, you know, bad shoots that law enforcement officers keep their jobs. It's just like it's such a challenging space right now. And you know, for me, like I try and tell people, like, how can you not? Law enforcement officers do this day in and day out. This is what they do. This is not like a veteran who goes to war for 1 year. This is a guy who does it for 30 fucking years and has so much trauma that most of the law enforcement, most of the police officers don't have an ability to say, hey, I'm not feeling the type of way. Cause then you already know the public, not the public, but your unit they view that as a weakness, and we got to get our minds out of that space. So all those things that has made law enforcement, the job, that much harder. And that is like crazy to me how I feel bad for law enforcement officers. And it is a space now that is like, I tell like my son, you want to be a law enforcement? He goes, I don't know. You know, you tell me as a kid, I'm like, fuck yes, I want to be a cop. I want to be a LAPD, you know, and the culture shifted, and it's a much harder mental health space than it was because of the public scrutiny.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's been hard. And I came out of recruiting before I was promoted most recently, and it was just recognizing I do not blame anyone for leaving in the last handful of years. Absolutely not. Some of my best friends left, right? And hats off to them. They're doing other things. Some first responders, some not. Like, you did your time. Thank you for your service. Same as I would say to all our military veterans. Like, we shouldn't judge people because they do 4 years in the military, not 10, that they didn't become a lifer, right? Like, it's more common to not be a lifer. So like law enforcement, firefighting, like medic, what have you, CO, if you did 3 to 5 years, like, thank you. Like, you contributed, if you did it with, conviction and your values and, moral compass, then like you contributed towards this thing called society in a positive way. There's so many people that came in the last few years that under this time of scrutiny that I'm like, thank you as well. Now I think that we're at this point where I've focused so much on ownership and how do you do leadership? It starts with yourself, right? Lead yourself and wellness, and these things all intersect. And that's what I really think we need in law enforcement now, rather than wallowing. And we're always going to be subject to be politicized for someone else's interest. But like, how do we take care of ourselves? How do we take care of our people? That's all we can really control. That's all we should really bite off, because that apple's big enough, that bite. Yeah. And that's what we can manage, right? So stoicism, just control what you control, take care of your health, look out for your people, do the job, like, want to do the job. And if you don't, like, no harm, no foul, like, go find something else and contribute into society in a different hat, right? A different way. But yeah, I think that the wallowing on what sucks and how tight our hands are, although those conversations need to be had in constructive ways, it doesn't help us to constantly dwell on it.
Yeah, that's not a healthy mental space to be in. The Border Patrol has been in that space for a while. A lot of the morale was low because the career was just different under different leadership, right? The different administration. Now that there's new administration, I think there's going to be a lot more positive feeling as an agent, but I personally feel there's going to be a lot of public scrutiny as well of because of the immigration conversation.
Oh, sure.
It's a very complex topic, and it's going to be a very interesting 4 years to see what is shifted. And Border Patrol, I say that because that's what I was, and I work with Border Patrol, and law enforcement is a tough space, and I absolutely love it, and I love that we've been able to create or cultivate a space that focuses on mental health in those spaces, man. So my kudos, my hat off to you, man, for taking charge in that space for your world, for your circle. It means a lot because there's not a lot of us willing to kind of throw ourselves into the arena of that, which is a very different space of law enforcement capacity. Dude, I want to wrap this up, but first I want to make sure that you tell everyone your organization and your podcast so they can jump on there and check it out and support you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you so much, man. I know that we could go for a long, long time, but I know how it goes, and we will go a long, long time if we don't put a cabinet somewhere. But yeah, my thing is Blue Grit Wellness. That's my website, bluegritwellness.com. It's consulting, it's training, as well as just trying to provide positive content, right? So I'm most active on Instagram through that handle. Blue Grit Radio is my podcast, where it is a lot about police culture, wellness, leadership, culture, where these things all intersect, how we can build better cops, better agencies, just be positive and control what we can control, right? And so on the website, the newest release is entry-level testing guide, because we all know how that game goes. Like, I was in hiring, both sides of the table. We just need good people to get into our seats and help us out, right? So it's recognizing all these things I would personally coach on, do feedback sessions, but just putting it into one comprehensive guide. So people can find that on the website if they're interested. And stay tuned for Get Gritty, which talks about all the things we're talking about, right? Like work-life balance, wellness. How do you process that for you? Because everyone's an individual. But I appreciate it, man. Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, I'm gonna welcome you to come speak to my group. We do it Tuesday nights. Awesome. It's called Light Diffuse. I'll make sure to send you the invite for the next one that I'll be available. Work has me traveling a lot, so I have to bring in guest speakers from time to time. But
yeah, man,
I'd love for you to be there for one that I host, so you can kind of see what the nature of it is. We have a counselor on every call. We have a social worker on every call, and we have me on every call as much as I can be. But it's just a group of dudes trying to figure it out, man. And it's been a really cool space.
No, I appreciate for what you're doing. You're wearing a lot of hats, and I love that you're modeling that and leading by example. Like, hey, you got to take care of Vince and everybody, so you can better do that. So good on you, man.
Appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much, bro.
No, thank you.